I've got to move my screen here. Okay, hi, Jody. What we wanted to have you talk to us about is two things, I guess. One is last year when we were allocating CRF money, we allocated a significant amount for Efficiency Vermont to work with schools. And that was something that, well, Senator Bruce, who was chair of education, and his committee member, Andy, really came up with this proposal, and which seems to be very well received. There's 15 million of CRF money that has not been expended, and in order to release money, we have to appropriate it, because there was this language about it would revert. And so the thinking is not to revert it for other purposes, but to continue and authorize the spending beyond that date in the legislation to finish up some projects. So we would like to get an update on your view about projects that are outstanding, how this money could be spent, and would you support the continued use of this 15 million that's still available?
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Again, for the record, my name is Dan Riley. I'm the Director of Public Affairs here at Efficiency Vermont, and joining me is Jody Lesko, the Director of Programs and Implementation, and really the architect behind this very successful school IAQ program. We do have some slides, and the sort of the second part is on weatherization, and we can kind of get into as much or as little of that as you want, sort of time permitting. And so. Okay. If you don't mind, I'm just going to share my screen, and we can just walk you through a few slides, which I will also share with the committee.
All right, that'll be fine.
Just want to make sure everybody can see my screen.
Not yet.
Yes, we can.
There we go.
Very quickly, because I know you guys are familiar with Efficiency Vermont, and we're short on time. You know, we are the state's energy efficiency utility. Over the last 20 years, we've developed a statewide infrastructure for delivering energy savings that's really built on having staff in nearly every county across the state, strong relationships up and down the supply chain, customers viewing us as a trusted partner, really working with a network of partners, supply chain actors throughout the state. I think that's critically important, both in our school indoor air quality work and why the program has been successful, and in the weatherization funding discussion as well. We feel like the results for Efficiency Vermont speak for themselves in terms of over 2.6 billion in energy saved, 12 million tons of CO2. Just really quickly there, and then moving directly into the school IAQ program. I want to turn it over to Jody, who can kind of give you guys a quick timeline of what we've accomplished so far.
Great. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Chair Kitchell and members of the committee for having us here. We are thrilled to talk about the work that we've done. And while, let me say for the record, my name is Jody Lesko, and I am the Director of Programs and Implementation for Efficiency Vermont. And I have had the immense privilege of leading the Schools Indoor Air Quality Grant Program on behalf of the state over the last 8 months or so. And I'm here to talk about where we've been, what we've accomplished, and how, and what lies ahead. And so while I know that 2020 for many of us is a year that we would rather keep in the rearview mirror, let's take a quick stroll down memory lane here. And I'll start by saying that the state of Vermont, the legislature, and the governor really had the immense foresight to invest early and identify the needs of K-12 HVAC and indoor air quality as a critical step to take at the outset of the pandemic in order to get schools reopened as safely as possible. And we were the first state in the country to prioritize these investments, and we remain the only state in the country that prioritized CRF funds for this purpose. So that is hats off to legislators and the administration, and we would not be seeing the impacts that we have, which I'll show you in a slide here, a later slide, without that foresight. So thank you to all of you. So last summer, the legislature created the program. initially allocated $6.5 million of CRF funds to the program, and the governor enacted it on July 1st. About a week later, Efficiency Vermont officially launched the program publicly and engaged in a robust outreach and engagement effort to ensure schools knew about the funding. And by the 15th of September, we had over 300 schools in the state that were officially enrolled. Now, we thought that $6.5 million was really all that our supply chain and workforce could bear in the timeframe that we had for the grant program. And as you all know, we learned that the workforce and supply chain really rose to the occasion. And as we were seeing the needs quantified by schools as they submitted to us scopes of work, and we helped them refine them to really have the highest impact on their indoor air quality within the timeframe that we had, the legislature allocated in two separate acts an additional $11.5 million. So in total, $16.3 million was allocated to schools in the form of subgrants by the end of the year. And as Chair Kit, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as you mentioned, if I could just jump in for a second, Jody,
Sure.
There's been some confusion over the last 24 hours regarding this final 15 million. And that's why the timing of this hearing was very fortuitous in terms of, it does seem clear that it would have to go through the appropriations process and to get out the door. To be clear, our position at Efficiency Vermont, we firmly believe we can put this funding to good use. We're still very much in the midst of a pandemic. There's still a lot of work to be done, but time really is of the essence here, especially sort of thinking about the summer and trying to get as much of this important work done as the pandemic goes on over the summer. A lot of this large equipment, the ordering time is about 10 to 12 weeks in terms of getting some of that equipment in place. And in terms of this 15 million would require a new agreement with AOE and with AOA in terms of that, getting that in place. And so sort of working backwards, time really is of the essence there.
Mm-hmm. Well, we appreciate it. That's why we're considering this in our expedited bill. The House is working on a version, and we are trying to identify areas of either CRF funding or general fund one-time money that we can move quickly and not, take the amount of time that it would require if we just did it through the regular budget process. So that's why we're having you in today, is how if we appropriate the unexpended money. What you're saying is the sooner the better, simply because of the need to order and the time delay and involved here.
Exactly right.
Okay. And the other question, and then is, we've heard that there are projects identified that would that the 15 million could easily be used to support the goals here.
That's right. So let me just quickly run through the program components that allows us to identify those projects and move through them quickly. So I think this really speaks to why we were able to move quickly last year and why we think that this appropriation is appropriate this year. So North Star for us is keeping it simple and making the complex as easy as possible so that schools can take action. So we have intake, scoping, and reimbursement as a three sort of stepping stones along the process. We've provided clear technical guidance that distills the national guidelines so that schools do not need to wade through hundreds of pages of documents and presentation, that they can see our technical guidance and know exactly how to prioritize actions based on those national guidelines. And then we've provided ongoing support, and we continue to do this in the form of biweekly webinars and one-on-one support for both eligible schools and all of their contracting partners. So talking about, you can go to the next slide, Dan. So that is really what allows us to have this kind of impact. And so I'll talk about this impact and talk about what that means for an additional appropriation and where we would go with that. So with the appropriation last year, we were able to serve 314 schools with that within that grant program. Over 62,000 students now go to school in buildings with improved HVAC systems. 6,500 teachers now teach in schools. with improved HVAC systems. 13 million square feet of schools space now has improved ventilation and filtration. And I want to focus on this one here, the 40 schools. We identified that a subset of schools that needed improvements in their HVAC systems had no means of intaking fresh air from outside and moving it through their building. So that's ventilation. So 40 schools were able to install large equipment that for the first time since their school has existed, they have the ability to draw fresh air in and move it throughout their building.
Wow.
We also look at the economic activities and economic impact related to the investments. So to date, this number will continue to go up as we continue to process invoices from schools from last year's program. But to date, 140 companies were involved in the project work at schools. And that ranges from, 3-person family electrician businesses all the way up to the largest HVAC contracting and controls firms in the state that employ over 100 employees apiece. So really hundreds of people were involved in executing and installing these projects in schools. So the reason that I wanted to focus on those 40 schools is that's a key point in sort of the unmet needs. So Dan, you can go to the next, actually, no, stay right here. My notes are on this slide. I was going to add a slide there and I decided not to. So with the $15 million appropriation that Chair Kitchell mentioned, we would continue to focus on the most critical needs that we couldn't meet within the constraints of the program last year. So there are 3 specific areas that we would focus on. The first is there were projects that hit what I like to call bumps in the road in the construction process. So we approved a specific grant amount. They started the installation. They ran into things like wiring that needed to be updated, duct work that needed to be additionally added. They needed to do some work on their roof that they didn't anticipate. And all of that elongated their project timelines so that what they were able to complete within the grant term was less than what they originally expected. But that work was still slated, is still in progress. And so that would be one area that we would focus on for the 15 million, is just allowing those projects to complete and be funded.
And what's your estimate of those projects in terms of the money out of the 15 million?
That's between 4 and 5 million.
4 to 5. All right, thank you.
Can I just clarify before we go further? So there was initially 6.5, then 11.5, total of 18.
Yes.
You said that 16 million or so had been allocated to schools in the form of grants. Is the 15 million that we're talking about part of that original 18 million?
No, it's part of the 100 plus.
It's part of the $78 million that was for other education that was unexpended.
Okay, so the original 18 million has been laid out or nearly so?
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
So the second area of focus for the $15 million would be on these larger scope projects like those 40 schools that I talked about with the impact. So we know that by early to mid fall, the supply chain was too constrained to be able to deliver large equipment and have it be on site within the grant term, which was a requirement for it to be eligible for grant funding. So mid fall, we started pivoting those scopes of work to smaller measures and pieces of equipment that could be delivered within the grant term. And so we know that there's outstanding need there, simply that the supply chain and workforce could not deliver. And we know of just over 40 schools that continue to not have the means of bringing that fresh air in and move it throughout their building. So we would focus those efforts on ensuring that those schools are able to provide ventilation in their schools for the first time. And then finally,
I'm sorry, I have to point out, among other things, this committee has also been worried about radon. And, if you had buildings where no fresh air was coming in at all, you've basically got staff and kids sitting in whatever is in their building without any hope of circulation. So that's an amazing number to me that we had that many. Yeah.
Yeah, it is amazing. So out of the 40 schools that do not have ventilation system, we've got the 4 to 5 million for projects that didn't get completed because of complications, like, as you said, wiring or other work. 40 schools that don't have ventilation systems at all. Would that be, you said that would be your certainly a priority. Is there an estimated figure on what you think those projects would cost?
Yes, that's 5 to 6 million.
5 to 6, okay. And then number 3
is the 100 schools that didn't participate in the program last year. So we have less information about their needs, but using what we know about the average project cost and the lead times, we estimate the additional, that would be $5 million if you're keeping track, would be used to engage and deploy measures and installation in the 100 schools, or as many of them as we can reach, that didn't initially participate in the program last year.
Okay. Bobby, you're muted, but I see you've got a question.
Yeah, I would hope that now none of this money would be spent on schools like Burlington High School that we ran into this last year that had to close down because of other contaminants that these air handlers aren't going to be using. So do we test these buildings before we go and spend an additional bunch of money to make sure there's no PD ODs in there or any of those chemicals that we can't take care of?
Senator, is that a question for me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes. That's an excellent question. So I would say you're right. Indoor air quality encompasses things that go beyond the sort of COVID necessary things that we were originally scoped with. That said, part of the funding that we were appropriated last year, we allocated to bulk purchasing indoor air quality monitors and siting those at the school so they could absolutely test the various things that are going on in their buildings. Now, I cannot say with certainty that the monitors that we selected would address, would measure the things that you're talking about here. But I think it's absolutely worthwhile to say that testing and understanding sort of what the current state is very important. And then knowing if what you've done with your HVAC system is actually having the impact that you want in improving the indoor air quality after that installation is complete.
And Bobby, I think it's fair to say that HVAC would be necessary in any case, no matter what they found. If you plan to continue using the building, remediation would always look to improve air quality. So, Burlington's a special case where they actually essentially condemned the building. In most cases, it would be more like, a shorter remediation process, but.
Yeah, and don't forget, the governor has proposed, I believe it's 5 million, I think 5 or 10. There's 10, I think, and part of it is for radon testing. So we have a number of initiatives around the health of our school buildings. And then, as I've mentioned to the committee, and you may be aware of it as well, the House is considering legislation and funding that would permit a statewide assessment of our school building infrastructure and do a comprehensive assessment for structural conditions, roofing, plumbing to radon to PCB. So we're really trying to get a better handle on the state of our K through 12 infrastructure. So it's important, I think, to say what Phil said. Even with all that, the work we're doing here on air quality is not going to be wasted money. I think that's probably the heart of Senator Starr's question.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I would just also like to add that we're not trying to be oblique here in terms of grouping into buckets of schools. Unfortunately, as a regulated entity that deals with a lot of sensitive customer data, we have strict rules about customer engagement that we can speak to. However, if anyone has any individual questions about schools in their district, we're happy to proactively reach out to them and get permission to share in terms of dealing with specific individual schools.
Huh. Well, that's interesting when we're using public funds that we don't have access to that data.
You have access to it as soon as the school gives us the yes to do it. I know it's one of, as a person who's worked for a long time with schools information, it's always a bit of a tricky spot because it is public information. These are public dollars that are going into it. But because we are regulated through the Department of Public Service, we have to abide by those confidentiality rules, which just means that we ask the school for permission
I
before
see.
we're able to
Okay.
provide it.
It's
That's all.
because you're a regulated utility that it's
Correct.
That's
causing.
exactly right.
Do you have other screens? Otherwise, we can go back to seeing, people's questions and faces. Oh, Senator Balance back. All right. So now you've, between the three proposed, you've managed to spend the 15 million. So our committee has to make a decision about authorizing the spending of that money. And obviously you can see we're favorable to making sure that it's spent in a good way. So unless there are other questions on this, but I do want to say this really is reflective of the work that came out of Senate Ed last year. The initiative for this clearly came out of that committee, and Senator Baruth was chair, and we had Senator Perchlik, who worked very hard with everyone who envisioned this approach toward dealing with this particular area of public health in our children and the pandemic. And so I want to just give credit where I think it is due, and so it's great to see that this has been such a success story.
I just would love to echo that, and especially thank Senator Baruth and Senator Perchlik for their work on this and their foresight, and to just say, this has really been a success story that's gotten national attention. We at Efficiency Vermont have heard from states as far away as Hawaii, from the from federal government entities, in terms of it really was the first of its kind type of program, and a lot of other states are coming to us now, sort of saying, tell us how you did that. And so I wanted to thank you, Senator Baruth, for your, all of your help, instrumental in getting this off the ground.
Absolutely. And if I could just return the compliment, Efficiency Vermont ramped up the program. First of all, designed it, put it out, and that was under the December 31st timeline. Mm-hmm. And you guys made that timeline. Then you took on additional funding and work. So, all of our confidence in you was well repaid. So thank you very much.
Yes, Alice, you have a question.
So great work. I just wanted to ask though, with regard to not being able to give out the information, is the information available as to which schools did participate and are done? That information is available or not?
All of the information is available. It's just the need for us to get specific approval from the school before we share it.
We should have done that in advance. If you want the money, you give approval.
I don't think that's
seriously, because these are very legitimate questions. And I realize that, normally the funds you're using are generated as a regulated utility. These were additional funds that came in, and they weren't through the rate structure at all. And so I guess we never anticipated this issue around having to go back and ask each individual school to give us permission. And maybe we should consider, I don't know, we probably need to have some discussion around that, but whether acceptance of the money allows us to know how it was spent and for what and where, because everybody's going to say, did my school participate? How did my region benefit? I mean, that's what is inevitable questions. So Alice, you had something else?
Wanting to know is just a very simple answer.
Mm-hmm.
Are the names of the schools available that did participate presently?
No.
Yes or no?
Do you mean publicly? No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't we put a
Bobby,
one-liner?
Bobby, wait a minute. Bobby, let me finish, okay, please. So I'm wondering, what I was thinking was, of the 100 schools that didn't participate for whatever reason, it would be good to know, is that information known? It's kind of a wrong way of going about it, so that one could be speaking with them to perhaps encourage them to apply.
To be clear, I know that information. Yes.
I think
work
Jody, you can speak as to why.
So in other words, we should call a few of the schools that we think might not have and ask them to apply?
Yes, well, this is what I'll say. If there is additional funding appropriated, my first call is to the Vermont Superintendents Association to say, here are the list of schools that we have that participated, kind of true it up with them, make sure that we are all in agreement about the next steps. And then we divide that list into different outreach categories, right? So we know the schools that don't have any mechanical ventilation, that gets a certain kind of immediate outreach. We know the schools that didn't participate at all, that gets a specific kind of outreach. We have those incomplete projects, that gets a specific kind of outreach. So all of that information is known. It's just, like you say, what we can say publicly without the school's permission is limited. And certainly in aggregate, if you think about 75% of Vermont schools participated in this program, and the geographic distribution is very even. Every single nook and cranny of the state has a dot on my map for a participating school or district. And so it's, there's the participation is robust. I know having 100 schools that didn't participate sounds, no one wants that, right? Everyone wants every single school to participate. We do too. But just also keep in mind, 75% of eligible schools did participate and receive funding.
That's good.
So I guess it raises the question, though, if we allocate an additional 15 million, should we in fact have the condition of receipt of this money, which isn't coming through the regulated utility process? Is it possible that we could say, with the money, are you giving permission to have that data made available to the people that made the money available? I guess that's
Yes.
one thing I'll just put out there. And Senator Ballant, you had a hand up, and then Senator Westman.
Just as a reminder to me, Jody, this was K-12 public and independent, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Senator Westman.
I would just want to be careful about that, because anything that the way that information would be released to us would immediately become public. And I would not want to put a school where they found something that was wrong, released in a way that created a stir in a community that was that sometimes this information needs to be handled delicately.
Okay.
And so I think we should eventually get the information, but we need to be careful.
Well, I'm not suggesting that kind of sensitivity or that sensitive information. It just, for people, transparency. If somebody said, oh, you just have allocated between the different over 30, 35 million to support this, and you can't tell us where it went, in some ways, a certain amount of transparency, I think is not unreasonable.
I'm not suggesting that, but I'm just saying I don't want an individual case in a community to blow up in a way.
Okay. Yes, Jody, you have thoughts, or Dan?
I have two comments on that. The first is we have not had a school say no. Whenever a legislator has wanted to know about information in a district in a school in their district, the school has always said yes. The second thing I'll say is there have been two that I can recall off the top of my head, two instances where a superintendent approached us for help with messaging to the school board and to the community when their initial testing, they were a little bit worried about how to message that to their community members. And that is absolutely the support. We can provide that level of support. There's lots more that we could say about the reporting. I know that we're under a tight timeline today, but there's absolutely ways for us to get information out in aggregate as well as with specifics.
That would, I think in the aggregate, that's handy.
Yeah, that would
Dan. Dan, you have
just a couple of things. One, I know the other part of this was on weatherization. I know we're over time.
Yeah.
I'm always happy to come back if the committee prefers. It's also a complex issue if you'd rather do it that way. But staying on schools for just 1 second, just a question for you, Madam Chair, because I know Jody's going to get several calls from schools tomorrow morning. When you say an expedited bill, are you talking about something that's moving very quickly within the next couple of days or within sort of week? Just any clarity you could give around that. We would appreciate.
I would hope in the next couple of weeks. And the big bill normally is not going out and being finalized until, into April, beginning of May. So that's what I'm talking about, something that could move quite a bit faster. That's what we have in mind. So it would be really appropriating money and authorizing spending for programs or services that are more time sensitive, or the seasonality, or very much related to public health needs. So that's what our thought is on that. So weatherization, do you want to I realize we're a little bit over, but do you want to speak to the weatherization? And I'm really not clear. Is this how Efficiency Vermont, how we've taken and looked at Efficiency Vermont as more in a more comprehensive way, and to support weatherization? Or are we talking, I'm really not sure. And Stephanie, perhaps you could clarify that in terms of what aspect of weatherization we're sitting on. Two proposals from the governor around additional money for weatherization. Some goes through the traditional weatherization, some is going through Vermont Housing. And so I'm not sure. Stephanie, can you be clear what you were thinking of on weatherization here?
I don't think I was thinking of weatherization here. I was I'm not sure where that weatherization label came into their agenda.
Okay,
That was part of my email exchange with Dan originally.
If I could, I think the only thing I would just say is that, Efficiency Vermont does do a large amount of weatherization work. We are the largest weatherization provider in the state in terms of projects. The governor has proposed 25 million in his budget for weatherization work. And I think that's where the intersection is in terms of thinking about the weatherization ecosystem and how this one-time money fits into the existing work that Efficiency Vermont is doing, some other sort of innovative financing ideas that are being discussed, workforce development, which is really critical in terms of making sure there's enough workers to do that, outreach, especially for lower income Vermonters, reaching them where they are, and then that mix of incentives and financing. So it's a complex topic. It's one I know Senator Westman is very immersed in as well, and in Senate Natural. And so I have some slides. I can get into that, or I'm always happy to come back at a later date.
We're going to have to do it at a later time, because what you're getting into is the governor's proposed one-time initiatives, and some of that may be maybe some of that work we would say we've got capacity and we should move it ahead, but I don't have a sense of how we would chunk that out, to be honest. And we have not heard that specifically. There are two pieces. One is that through the traditional weatherization that's been done by OEO and NITO for decades, and then the other is the 16 million that would go to Vermont Housing Finance. And then I do know that, when several years ago, we did look at Efficiency Vermont, and then I guess there was a bill last year that came out of Natural Resources that was looking at the resources and expertise of Efficiency Vermont and how it supports weatherization goals. So there are a number of discussions, I guess, going on, but much beyond our time frame for today. The focus for today really was around the unexpended CRF money. And then the weatherization ties into a much larger proposal, a $20 million use of one-time general fund. Correct. So we will be taking that up certainly.
We're more than happy to come back and do a deeper dive. But, for today, we do really appreciate the committee's attention to the schools issue. And this was very fortuitous timing. And we really, really appreciate all of the support for the program.
Yeah, and the one thing that I've asked and been getting, and I have not asked for this, but for each of these requests, I think the departments that would get the appropriation there, they produced a white paper around how the money would be spent, like for weatherization. I mean, how many homes are we talking about? Low interest loans, no interest loans, outright grants, depending on how it's designed. So we haven't really gotten into any of the information around the proposal. And I know that Natural Resources has been taking some testimony on that. I would imagine Health and Welfare has been part of that because obviously the OEO program has been operated out of Human Services for since the 80s.
We've taken testimony in Natural Resources almost every day for the last 2.5 weeks.
Well, then you should have all the answers to these questions, Senator Westman.
We will have a recommendation for you. And
okay. I
would just say about your schools that didn't. When I have Hyde Park, that the school was just finished within the last 2 years, they were in the 100 that didn't feel they needed help.
Oh, well, because of just the state of the art construction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I have 3 elementary schools that are in that same position within
but that's kind of helpful because then it shows the universe is, that it's not as though 100 deliberately said we didn't want to participate. Some would say, look, the whole building and design makes us feel comfortable that we have an adequate system in place. So
that's correct.
There are probably some other schools out of that 100 that would fall into that bucket.
Yep.
We heard from 3 different schools that felt they wanted to know that they supported us, but they didn't feel like their needs should be prioritized because of recent upgrades that they had made. It's a small number, but we did hear from a couple of schools about that.
All right. Other questions or comments at this point? Okay. Thank you for coming in, and I guess we'll be having more conversations, and I'm sure that policy committees will be making recommendations to us as well.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah, very good work.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
We are adjourning the committee. We did have committee discussion at 4, and I think Stephanie's on. So before we end up the day, we've been taking, obviously, as Rich has said, and have to hear from Natural Resources around whether a portion of that weatherization money should be included in that expedited bill. Is there a plan that some of that could move forward? Within the education front, there is a desire to really, which has been an ongoing discussion, and that is such concern over the literacy level and the reading level of 3rd graders. They're testing, and I think, what is it, half of our 3rd graders are not at standard. I mean, it's a very significant percentage. And so a request to move some money out to support, and this really gets into the whole thing about what will be students' needs once we get through the pandemic. And with remote learning, a lot of kids have experienced, have not experienced the full benefit of in-person education. And so there's a request to fund training for teachers with programs like the Stern Center, or there are others available to help teachers acquire skills around how different teaching techniques to improve reading skills of kids, depending on what they have for their individual needs. So there's that. there's a desire to do like we did with the CRF money. Remember, we gave an appropriation to the state college system, and over about 1,000 Vermonters took advantage of certification or other courses. And maybe that's a free course for CCV for students to help them get connected and hopefully pursue higher education. And then there was what we need to do now to really for summer programming. And there's money, some of that money we have from the 12 million that went to the Agency of Education that helped fund some of the 3.5 million to the Burlington High School. The request was more to use lead time because you have to hire the staff. You have to make sure parents would know that that program is going to be in place. So giving some predictability and some advanced work around setting up summer programs that might also help with remediation. So those are the three things that have come in from the Education Committee for consideration. And so weatherization is there. And then, of course, the economic development is looking at that package of what we do for business grants. And the governor had proposed, and we didn't put it in either in the budget adjustment, but that is how you target and what businesses would that would you want to provide assistance. Some have not, but there was one group of business, they just were newly open, so they didn't have a year of comparison for losses. And so they kind of got left out, and yet many of them are new and struggling. So we need to have some recommendations relative to, if we do business grants, make sure that we know how they're being used toward what businesses, what would be the criteria. And so House Commerce has been working on that, we were told, and have heard from Tom Cavett, who had thoughts about how to, make sure that the money went out in the most helpful way. So that is another item on that could go into this bill as well. And then we did put together, Stephanie, she's been keeping a list. So those are I think hearing from natural resources and education are the additions that have come in since we first started that list. Bobby, you have anything? I can't believe you aren't cogitating there in ag.
Yeah, we've got a couple of items coming, one on food security and universal meals. And the other one deals with for ecosystems improvements. That one isn't too big a one. It's like 250,000. But the school meals, universal meals, that one's going to cost a few bucks, possibly. It depends on what happens at the federal level, but we've taken a tremendous amount.
Okay, but don't forget, we're only dealing with one-time money. So if you're talking about something that involves base spending, that probably isn't going to go in this bill.
The ecosystems part would be one-time money.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, I don't know, and maybe you can get more information on this, Bobby. We had testimony about a position in the Agency of Education to work with schools. Is that a time-limited position?
No, that's what they're running on now. And that ends this coming July 1. And they really need one more person or fill that position full time because of all this food issue. It's in the child nutrition program.
Yeah, my question though is that to get programs started up and give technical assistance? And is it one that lends itself to one time because it's like a limited service that you would do with a grant to help? And, we're talking about a year or some period of time, or are you talking about ongoing
I
position to support the program?
I think that it's an ongoing position because Rosie, they've only got 9 people, 8 of them are full-time. And the 9th one's one of these vacant positions that they picked up funding for. But that's a position that's ending this July. And I think Rosie mentioned this morning that really should be a full-time position.
All right, well, if we were talking about a full-time position like a grant and with the understanding it was another year extension, but no money beyond that, that's one thing. But if the desire and the intent is to have an ongoing permanent full-time position in the agency for this purpose, then that'll have to wait until the big budget. Big bill.
I mean, I don't see why we couldn't extend it until 23. Put it in this budget for one more year at least, and figure out in that year if the feds are going to come through with some type of a universal meals program. They could come out with that in their next bill that they're talking about.
But if we're talking about doing something to pick up July 1st, we could do that in the big bill. That's something that we could.
Yeah.
We don't need to make a decision on it in the next 2 weeks.
No.
Okay.
And I want to send that bill down to Brian in education so they can look it over as well.
Okay. All right. Well, you see, we have one-time money that we can obviously think hard about how we want to make those longer term investments. We just heard about 53 million, just within the IT arena. And I don't know. I think everybody's got a list. We were sent this list of the governor's one-time initiatives. So we need to take a look at that and see which ones we like and which ones we want to moderate. I know Rich talked about is the right split between weatherization and transportation to get Vermonters into more fuel efficient vehicles. And is that a better return in terms of carbon reductions as opposed to, how we want to carve that up? So there are a whole host of refinements here.
Yeah, well, we could move them out of those 1990 and to 2000 Lincolns and Cadillacs that they're buying for $500 and put them in a Ford Escape that's getting 30 miles to a gallon. And it would improve their mileage by 20 miles to a gallon.
Yeah, it would also help them it would also, obviously, it helps their pocketbook and it helps
the planet
the
too.
Environment. Yeah.
There's an aspect of education that they have to be sold on. That's the car that they would like.
Well, I would just say one of the issues also that we are been running into is there are counselors in the community action agencies that deal with families individually about all of this work. And there's $1 million for outreach and counseling and face-to-face meetings between the Vermont Housing Finance Agency in the of the 25 million, $1 million is going for face-to-face meetings. And the question comes up, how is that going to relate with what OEO is and the community action agencies are already doing? So we're going diving into all of that.
Wow.
Yeah, good.
But all right. So a lot of what community action is I'm just trying to cross, because obviously when in last year in transportation, we used the community action agencies for that, for the vehicle and also for the repair program that turned out to be problematic and its implementation. And there was the whole thing about it's not just getting somebody a car, it's helping them with their budgeting and their finances and understanding. So the question I have for you, Rich, is someplace else we're funding a different entity to provide that financial literacy?
Well, a piece of the money that's going to the Vermont Housing Finance Agency also has $1 million for direct outreach and sitting down directly with the participants. So one has to question.
Is that for weatherization?
That's for weatherization.
So that would be the higher, more the households whose incomes are higher than in the OEO administered weatherization program.
That's what we think, but we're trying to figure out exactly where it all fits. They came in today to testify, but they've got $1 million here for outreach to people, and I've got the community action agencies. So we just got to figure out where all of that fits. We're trying to sort through it, is what we're trying to do.
Okay, well, it might be a different market.
It might
I'm
be,
not sure.
it might be different, but I don't think it totally is, because what you're talking about is a lot of this is talking about renters, because they're running the program that has the bonding component.
Well, we've got a whole host of programs. I mean, we just approved the 110 for renters, and there was outreach on that.
This is, yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So,
You know, something, Jane, that we could do in ag is our slaughter facilities. Remember, we talked about that last fall, and we were going to put some COVID money in there, and then the agency said, no, that wasn't a good idea, and they had their hands full. And well, anyways, they went back later in the fall and did
originally they said they could do it out of their working lands grant. So maybe we should, the governor wants to put more into working lands. Maybe we should carve a certain amount out and say X amount goes to support, these businesses.
Well, and some of that could start anytime now, because they have surveyed everybody, and the ones that are willing to expand, they have the space, but they don't have the outfits to make it all go. So we could put some money there in this expedited bill that they could get started on anytime.
I would support that. I definitely have farmers down my way who are desperate for more slaughterhouse capacity, and I would absolutely support that.
So that's something that got tied up. We talked about it, and then they said no, they could accommodate it, and then they came back at the very end in December, and oh no, we couldn't. So give us, and I think it was grants up to 750,000. It was a big amount there, which seemed to be, I don't know where that figure came from. So maybe you've had a chance to vet some of that.
Well, they could use, I think they could use $3 million in that area, and it would be well spent.
But the governor had only $3 million for working lands in total.
Well, yeah, I mean, there isn't enough for working lands, and the way the governor's got it set up, there isn't enough there. But if we put money in the expedited bill for the slaughter facilities, that would I can zero down on that dollar amount, make sure, but that's what they've given us.
All right, well,
that-
let me, if you want to put that forward, the one place that would fit, obviously, there's the governor's wants to put 3 million more on top of the base of working lands. That's a variation. What you're talking about is a very specific identified need. And
Yeah.
you have jurisdiction over both areas, so you're going to have to sort out what you would recommend. I mean, maybe
Yeah,
we'll have
and-
more money and we won't have to make these kind of choices, but for the purpose of right now, to add on, we either have to, I hate to make too many advance commitments on that total list because it closes off further discussion. But there's some things that we are agreeing upon make sense, move them out, and the slaughter seems to be one that fits that that criteria.
And it has an amplifier because you've got all of those folks who then have the value add that they're, that they desperately want to move. So in that way, it is helping
money out.
Get the slaughter money out. Okay, you're with us, Richie.
Yeah. Okay, I think
More
so. And I
slaughter.
think right now we're saying, all right, maybe that means that if we say this is a priority, it's out there, then, and that isn't on the governor's one-time list. Amazing. It was such an important thing in December and it isn't on the list now. Well,
I mentioned it, but he worked it through working lands, and I think that it's a big enough issue to so many these small ruminant farmers and
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
things
I don't think there's any disagreement. We say we should move it out. All I'm saying is it means that we're saying this is a priority over, just the open grants. We want to be more directive in terms of how the money goes out into that ag community. And so we have on their one-time list, the governor's proposing 3 million for working lands. We can say, well, we want to be a little bit more directive than just grant applications, and we want to support the development of slaughterhouse capacity because that has such a beneficial impact to our agricultural community in a variety of ways. So we're setting the priority.
Well, that's why I think we should take some time off from this year's session and make sure we have time to come back if we do get that pot of money and decide.
I'm saying right now, Bobby, if you want to put slaughterhouses ahead, we'll just take it off right now, that working lands category, and say, we want to direct it. We think it's very much in the spirit, and you tell me how much.
Yeah.
Whether it's.
We're going to send you a letter anyway. So,
okay.
So
all right.
We'll make it very official.
It's called the Dear Bobby letter.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Why don't you? All right. I think we've done enough. I think Bobby's done enough storming of his brain today. But that I think is good. And
that is good. Yeah.
I just find it hard that what's a priority, like the grants that had to go out in the budget adjustment. And then we were told that they can't even set it up for a few weeks. So it's like, it's really hard to reconcile the timing of this.
Too, because with the slaughterhouse, it's not as if we haven't known this for a while. Like we know that we've been short on capacity for a long time. And so it's, I know it's hard to put everything in your recommended budget, but this is something that my farmers have wanted for a long time. So
I think we're making a policy choice based on what we're getting from ag, and that is out of the money that we're putting into the agriculture sector, we want to be more directive than simply general grants, and that this is an identified need to help, and it certainly has a long-term benefit to supporting diversification. And is so you just tell me what the committee recommends, and then we'll see whether we can accept it or adjust it.
If you want me to make a recommend, I'd say 5 million, but no, I'll zero in on that and get it more exact.
Yeah, sharpen your pencil there, Senator Starr.
Don't worry, it'll be sharp.
I don't question that. Okay. And then Rich, at 12:30 on Thursday, we're going to have a further discussion about weatherization and.
Yeah,
what
that's tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Yeah, I thought it was at 12 o'clock, but then they told me 12:30, but
Yeah,
that's tomorrow.
yeah, Chrissy's doing a Zoom link, so we can
Perfect.
figure that out. Okay. And the House thinks that they might finish their expedited bill by Friday. I think that's quite ambitious. I think
Oh,
maybe ours
good.
might be a little bit more extensive by the time, because we've had a little bit more time, but we'll have a chance to see what's on their list. Okay.